2, 3, 4. Hello friends, Steve Dempster from Guitar Evolutions, and today and in subsequent videos we are going to explore the whole area of rhythm, because strumming is a big topic for a lot of guitarists and rhythm seems to be the topic of interest for a lot of players. So I thought I'd spend a couple of sessions anyway just exploring the whole area of rhythm, but not as it applies to reading rhythm or learning strum patterns from other people, anything like that. I'm talking about helping you understand how rhythm feels so that it's always available to you when you sit down and play the guitar. You don't have to wait to always be shown. It's just kind of like get up and walk. Pick your guitar up and strum. That's kind of what I want to get at. So in this video, we're going to start off with some very basic principles, and we'll build up subsequently from there. We'll do all of that right after this. Okay, welcome back. The whole notion of the feel of rhythm seems to really baffle a lot of up-and-coming young guitarists, because I think they're getting the impression that the way you learn to strum anything is you have to be shown how to strum it by someone else, either live or on a video or perhaps through a magazine. Perhaps you learn how to, oh, there's Juno, she's come to join me. Perhaps you've learned how to read rhythm, and that's a good thing. All of those are good access points to getting rhythm, but what I want to look at is, are you actually feeling some of the major components of rhythm, not the detail of it all yet, just the major components that will allow this hand to move in a more spontaneous fashion. That's what I am interested in helping you with. So to get started with it, I want to just bring up another image that I've used previously on some other videos. And it's just this layout of basically 4 measures with 4 beats inside of each measure. Now, in case you're unfamiliar, a measure, the metaphor that I tend to use, is like a carton of eggs, or a dozen eggs inside that carton. The carton represents the measure, and the 12 eggs that sit inside it could potentially represent pulses or beats. Typically for us, for our purpose, we're not going to deal with 12, we only deal with 4 beats, 4 pulses that will exist in that measure. And just the perception of those pulses becomes an important feature. Here on the image, I've got the pulses numbered out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 shows up a lot in contemporary type music. So it's good to have some familiarity with it. So when you're looking at this, we're just going to, I refer to it as a little structural unit, if you will, of music, although not yet. And what I want to do is let you listen, first off, to a very short sample, an audio sample, of a very, very simple backing drum kit that could be used on some particular tune. So let me cue that up right now. Here we go. This is Juno, by the way. No, 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 no. There's a few things I want you to take away from that very simple drum sample, and that is, once the count-in is done, the snare drum, the highest pitch sound, you hear it on beats 2 and 4 within that structure. So you have in one measure, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 beats. And on beat 2 and beat 4, you hear what's referred to as the snare drum. The highest pitched, that's my dog, the highest pitched drum of a drum kit. And on beats 1 and 3, you hear a kick drum. That's the drum that's handled by a drummer's foot. Let's take another listen so you're clear on that. Snare. And in between, the kick. Good. So that's one feature. The second feature is, after the sample has played through that whole structure, there is kind of a cue, if you will, at the end of it that tells other people in the band or in a jam session something else is about to happen, or we've ended this part and we're going to the next part. There's a communication that's happening, and this is what I want you to pay some deep attention to, because that stuff is going to inform what you're doing here. So let's take another listen, and we're going to listen for those cues at the end. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. One measure. Second measure. Third measure. Here it comes. A cymbal hit in this case. Third measure. Fourth measure. See what I'm talking about? That's why I call this little unit that we're working with structure, just a little structure, because that's what it's giving us, some information about how a particular tune might work. Okay, so yes, it's true, in real world playing, there would be commonly more elaborate drumming going on, and some of these features can be more difficult to grab a hold of, but you get better at it as you do it more and more. Your ears naturally tune in over time. Okay, that's point 1. So the drummer is basically expressing, feeling those beats, those pulses, and the grouping of them, in this case, in groups of 4. And at the end of that group, there's a little typical cymbal activity going on that tells us something about what's to happen or what's about to happen. Don't think of it any deeper than that for the time being. I just want you to be aware of it. But the point is that the drummer is doing that based on a feel and some training that they have about the structure of music. And the more you can tune into the structure of how music works, the easier it will be for you to magically pull off a strumming pattern, if you will. I call it a strumming solution to a song that you're hearing. Cool. Let's go on to the second point. So now we have a second image where basically the same layout is in place, but this time what I've done is I have queued up in each measure the bass note of a chord that we can play in that measure. This will end up being a very common chord progression that you've heard a lot of, and it may even remind you of a particular tune once we start adding chords into the mix. But I want you just to pay attention to how the bass plays itself out in relation to the drums. Nothing random is going on here. Everything is being centered around, I know you can hear it a little bit, that pulse or these 4 beats that you see in that image. The awareness of that that's going on in a piece of music is going to become the scaffolding, if you will, around which you're going to hang your strumming solution on. So let's take a listen to the same structure, but now with a bit of bass added into it. 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1. Second time around. So the notes, as you can see, are C, A, D, and G, just repeating themselves. Cool. Now here's a question, and when I ask it, most people kind of giggle at me because they think it's just so obvious and so simple. Actually, I shouldn't say most people will do it, but certainly some will. Given the count-in that you hear, I'll play it again so we can have another listen. Given the count-in to this structure that we're about to basically play, on what beat or pulse does the bass note get played on? If you're listening carefully, you'll realize the bass is hit once and it just rings and fades away during the measure, and then a new note gets hit and it fades away during the measure. So let's take another listen to it and see if we can become more aware of those features. Hits, dies away, hits, dies away, dies away. I get it. There's nothing really miraculous going on here. This is a very simple structure around which some noise is being placed, and when it is placed within the structure, it starts to have a musical character to itself. And what we want to do is pay attention to the influence of the structure on those noises, in our case the sound of a bass in this and a drum kit, and how they organize themselves to be able to tell you how you might strum it. Albeit there's very little information going on right now. But these are features that I want your ear to start getting used to. Okay, let's go on to point number 3, or image number 3. Okay, so now I've got a third image up here where we still have the same structure, but instead of just the bass notes listed out per measure, now I've translated those bass sounds into full out chords that you might see in some song. So you could treat that structure as if it's your favorite song on the planet that you're just about to play around the campfire, or it's a series of chords that somebody else is playing and you're just trying to figure out how you might want to strum along. What I'm looking for now is an answer to this question, because this is going to become quite critical. How are you going to strum, given the drums and the bass that you're hearing, and soon I'm going to let you hear these chords in keyboard, a synth kind of style. So there's no guitar at this point. How are you going to strum those chords? Lots of possibilities exist, but you have to pick something. So let's take a listen. Let's take a listen to the next sample with the keyboards added in, and hopefully that'll perhaps give you some ideas on how you might strum it. Be aware that what we're looking for is how can you, the musician, come up with a strumming solution to this, albeit really simple, kind of uninteresting little tune I've put together. So keep that in mind. Let's take a listen and we'll talk a bit more. C chord, A minor, D minor, G7. That's some rockin' tune, I must admit. So, when asked, how would you strum to that sound that you just heard? We've got the bass, we've got the drums, and we have some keyboards. Nothing very elaborate is going on, but how would you strum? What are the possibilities? And for the time being, given this lesson, I'm just asking you, what could you do given the 4 beats that exist within each measure across that particular chord progression, and come up with a strumming answer, a strumming solution. Some possibilities that I've got listed here that you might be thinking of to answer that question. Here's the one that most people don't like. It's the one that says some people are just naturally wired for rhythm, and they can come up with something right off the top of their heads, play it. Of course, they've got some experience with the instrument. It's not coming out of nowhere, really. But they could make something up that has its own coherent structure to it, and it'll sound great. So they're naturally wired. We're not worried about them. The next possibility is that you've had some experience in the past with some strum patterns. Maybe there's 2 or 3 of them that have been shown to you by someone, and you've used them so much that they become a natural sort of neurological wiring in your strumming hand. The problem with it is they become the only strum patterns you use on all your songs, and that can lead to all kinds of problems down the road. We're not looking to do that. I'm not looking to give you strum patterns. I'm looking for you to create one albeit a simple one based on this information. Maybe you've had experience, in fact, reading rhythms from actual written notation, rhythm notation that is, which is a really good thing to learn. And there's a way to notate pretty much all the rhythms that we want, and if there isn't, we just invent it as we go along. But for most standard music playing, there is a notational device available that says this is telling your eyeballs how long to play that sound for, and then stop, and then play this sound. Or maybe you're sitting there going, I have no clue what to do. I can see the chords, there they are, they're lined out right in front of me. I can feel those pulses, that's a good thing, but I don't know what to do with this hand, with these chords, to come up with something of interest. Well, let's look at what we know to help with the process. If I come back to this image, what you know for sure is in any one measure, you're only dealing with one chord. So that's good, because sometimes you're dealing with multiple chords, 2 or 3 in one measure. That can be a bit gnarly. So you only get one chord per measure. You know that within that measure, there are only 4 beats. So we're talking about structure here that you want your brain to be aware of. And typically those 4 beats, I'll just back up a bit here, those 4 beats will typically be the thing that you might just find yourself tapping your foot to when you're hearing a piece of music. That's an important feature right then and there. You could play on all 4 beats, which won't be particularly interesting, but it would be a reflection of your awareness of those beats. And you'd be amazed how many people do not pay attention to that. They're just looking for a mechanical strum solution to the song. It's good to get started with. It's not good to stay there very long. So what could you do? And more importantly, as you do it, you want to pay attention to the feel of what your decision was, because it's that feeling in the strumming action that you're going to ultimately be recalling some other time down the road. It becomes a wired-in feel, a vibe, if you will. It's very difficult to put a word to it. But here are some possibilities. And by the way, on these pulses, all you need to do is down strums. That's it. If you hear a little bass or other guitar going on, that's my son upstairs playing in the background. And unfortunately, the house is not entirely soundproofed. Okay, you could do this. You could strum any one of those chords on beat 1 and then not let that chord ring for beats 2, 3, and 4. Why would you do it? Just because you wanted to. So maybe it sounds like this. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And experiment with the speed of it, if you will. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Now, if you heard that in a song, let me get rid of that echo. If you heard that in a song, you would just hear it as that. You're not necessarily thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, with the awareness that that chord is being hit on beat 1 and not being allowed to play over beats 2, 3, and 4. Of course, you could do the opposite. You could hit it on beat 1 and let it ring, couldn't you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's not a particularly interesting or exciting solution, but it does sound different, and as a result, it feels different. So somewhere down the road, you might come across a tune that makes you feel like you want to do this. 1, 2, 3, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 4. 1, 2. But it's a feel. With all those pulses going through your nervous system. Maybe you're imagining the drummer or a bass, doesn't matter really at this point. What's important is minimally that you do perceive those pulses at whatever tempo you want to play them at, and that they generate a feel for the rhythm. So you could do that. You could strum on beat 1 and, strum on beat 1 and 2 and then let it ring for 3 and 4, or you could strum on beat 1 and 2 and don't let them ring. Don't let it ring for 3 and 4. You could not strum on beat 1, but strum on beat 2 and let it ring for 2, 3, and 4. You could strum on 1, rest on 2, strum on 3, and rest on 4. Do you see how you can begin to organize a whole series of, yes, relatively simple strum solutions, but they could be solutions to certain songs. Just because it's not elaborate in this hand does not mean it's not useful. You mustn't make that connection because it's simply not true. But this process of manipulating those pulses or those beats in some fashion by making decisions about where the chord will be hit, how long it will last, when will you silence it, when, etc., etc. It could be, there could be many solutions that you could come up with just from that simple little tune structure that we've been working with. And even though, you know, if I do decide to, for example, to play on beat 1 and not on beat 2, but do play on beat 3 and 4, just because you're not hearing anything on beat 2, from the guitar that is, does not mean nothing's happening. Silence is also musical when it's put into context with other things. There's a length of time that that silence lasts, and it has an impact on the overall feel of the rhythm. Like Simon and Garfunkel said, the sound of silence. It's an important feature to be aware of. You do not need to always fill up everything with sound. Sometimes the silence is more poignant in your strumming. So keep that in mind. What is the energy or the force that's making you play one possibility or another? Creativity is simply the biggest answer to that. At some level, you have to sort of get yourself away from the tether of a strummed, canned pattern of sorts and control this material from your own willpower, so to speak. I don't know if I said that very well, but there it is. That's what we're trying to get at, to get you past this hump of thinking, I need Stephen to show me what this hand has to do. Yes, at the very beginning of learning guitar, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just that too many players, they stay there too long. They keep learning to strum by always being given another strum pattern by someone else. They're never thinking it through themselves, and this is what I don't want you to fall prey to. You can think this through. We just need to have an understanding of musical structure. In this case, 4 beats for every measure of 4 measures. I hope it's making sense so far. And by the way, if you're thinking that, you know, the possible solutions to this are sort of boring, we haven't even, I've got a list here, we haven't even talked about musical dynamics, the loudness or softness of what you're doing, accenting certain strums and not accenting others. Maybe you're going to arpeggiate the chords instead of strum them. Maybe you're going to use different inversions and different voicings of chords, which change the sound in a more subtle way. mixing it up in some kind of fashion. This is very big. But because it's so big, we have to start with a very simple structural understanding of possibilities, strumming possibilities. So I'll admit and agree with you that we are limited to a degree, but when you get a handle on this at this starting level, if you can get this under control, then as you progress to more elaborate rhythm possibilities, there's Juno, you're able to handle them better. You're not so overwhelmed by the complexity of what this hand is doing. You see its complexity is just related to something you did earlier that's a bit more simple. And all we did is added an extra feature to it to bring it up in its energy level, so to speak. Now you're probably wondering, like, why am I holding the guitar? Because I haven't really played very much on this video. I haven't demonstrated anything. And that's because I do not want to give you a solution. I want you to sit with it, stew with it, figure out what you could come up with over those 4 measures and those 4 chords, given you're only playing whatever combination on those 4 beats. Keeping your strumming to simple down strums, no up strums, nothing fancy. I want you to decide this, so I'm putting this in your court. Now, of course, you're free not to do anything about it, in which case you're just putting off a unique training that is going to haunt you down the road, I guarantee it. What you do now, however simple it appears to you, will pay dividends down the road. And if it is simple, that's a good sign. That means you have some wiring for it. Still, learning to control all these features, how long the chord rings, how often you'll hit it before you stop it from ringing, how well you control those features is a function of your musicianship. And if we keep it simple now, you'll be able to handle that control much better, and then as things get more complex, you find it easier to do. That's the idea. So what's important here, what's the big takeaway from all this, is it really doesn't matter what solution you come up with right now. But let's say that you did decide to simply eliminate beat number 3. I don't mean eliminate the beat, I mean eliminate strumming on beat 3. Beat 3 still exists whether you're playing it or not. What would that sound like if I repeated it across this structure, and I repeated it so much that I began to get a feel for that particular rhythm without having to stare at the written image or stare at somebody doing it. It's coming from within me, from repetition and consistency and practice, and it's coming out through the guitar. Well, let's try this. This is now the time for me to play. So we know we've got C, A minor, D minor, G7. That particular chord progression, by the way, reminds me of a very famous song that I kind of grew up with in the 70s, and it might remind you of a particular tune as well. It's a very common chord progression. The tune that I'm thinking of is the tune Last Kiss, and I forget the band's name. Oh where can my baby be? The Lord took her away from me. She's gone to heaven. That one, okay? So, let's take a listen to what it sounds like to not play on beat 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Now I'm stopping the strings on beat 3, but you could choose not to do that. You could simply choose to let it ring, and it would sound like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but I did something very significant at that moment when I demonstrated that example. If you picked up on it, good for you. Here's what it was. I was counting at the beginning, making sure I wasn't going to hit the strings on beat 3, and then I didn't stop counting. You just didn't hear me. Now I'm doing it in my head. That allows me to be a bit more silent, listening to the effect of that strum pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4. You, whatever, take your pick. Stop on 3 or let it ring on 3. It's up to you. They're different. They sound different. And they could be specifically unique to a certain song. But you eventually see me doing this. That counting for now is still going on, but it's going on quietly in my head. And that allows me to focus a bit more on the sound pattern that eliminating beat 3 is producing. It's helping me get a feel for that strumming solution. And it's that feel that you're going to recall when you're sitting around the campfire and a particular tune comes up. And perhaps the way you've heard the tune in the past makes you feel that this is the best solution for it. It's a strum. And you don't need anyone to show you how to do it. You've done it many times before. And it just feels right. And that sound pattern, that's kind of what I call it, has gotten in your bones. And this will always happen when you learn rhythm. It's called entrainment. You're pulling the feel of the rhythm into your body as you experience it, so that when you go to replay it at some point in the future, you're not having to look at anything. You don't have to wait for somebody to show you. You're recalling the feel of it, because it's the feel that you want to express. Excuse me. I hope that's making sense. And this goes to the point where it's important to realize that even though you have a guitar and you know some chords and you're holding the pick, the fact that you can hit some chords doesn't mean rhythm is going to naturally happen. It comes from a human. Yes, I know there's a parrot or a parakeet. Parakeet? Oh, I can't remember now. Named Snowball, who apparently has a sense of rhythm. If you haven't checked that out, go on YouTube. You can see him pounding out the beat to Another One Bites the Dust. It's pretty hilarious to watch. But it's a very limited range of beats that this little dude can keep up with. Not like us. We have a much colorful and broader array of possibilities, such that I'm confident when I say it's only a human that makes rhythm. The guitar is not going to make rhythm. So if you don't learn how to make rhythm, every time you're playing a guitar, essentially you're kind of just being a robot. You're repeating a pattern, you're repeating a pattern that's just gotten wired in, and you don't know why you're repeating it. So why would you do that? It's not creative, it's not fun. So that's what I'm trying to help you with here today. And so what happens over time as these rhythmic feelings get into you is through repetition, they become so deeply internalized that on a whim, live in the moment, you could use those internal feelings of a particular strum and actually manipulate it in time, in the moment, while it's happening. Because you understand the structure from which the original thing came from. I hope that makes sense. This allows you to be far more creative in the moment, and it also explains why a lot of people who strum really well are actually altering the strumming as they go through the song. Sometimes it's by accident. That's cool. It still happens. But a lot of the time it's because they're hearing the drummer do this, so they're going to change what they're going to do in their hand in the moment, no planning. They hear the keyboard person do that or the singer do something, and they'll change accordingly. They're still staying with the pulse. They still are playing the chords as they need to play them, but how they express them can be changing moment to moment, as compared to when you get a, as you know me by now, I call them canned strum patterns, as opposed to starting that canned pattern at the beginning of the song and doing nothing but playing that pattern from start to finish unaltered in anything. No volume changes, no tempo changes, nothing. It's just play it, end it, song's done, move on to the next one, play it, end it. Is there a place for it? Of course there is. As I said, at the beginning of learning to strum, that is it's a very good place to start. But you just can't stay there for too long. It'll become a bad, bad habit. Whereas if you can change things up in the moment based on some stuff you're hearing, that's a very good thing. So that's it for this video, where we've just kind of skimmed the surface a little bit, primed you a bit for what's coming up. We're going to go a little deeper in video 2 and in video 3, and if it required, I'll do more. Just depends on the feedback that I'm getting. And but don't overestimate the power of how simple this first video's material appears to be. If you cannot control the beats and where you're going to hit those chords within that structure in some kind of a musical fashion, there's no reason to think you're going to be able to pull off particularly elaborate strumming patterns a couple of weeks from now. You can mimic particularly elaborate strumming patterns. That's very different than what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about getting you to mimic anything. I'm talking about getting you to produce something of your own intuitive, intentional creativity. There's a big difference there, and in order to help students train to do that, you have to learn to feel these fundamental features of rhythm, the pulse, or the beat, if you will, the speed of the piece. Ultimately, you know, whether it gets loud, whether it gets soft, whether it slows down a little bit, speeds up, those are all subtleties we're going to deal with potentially later down the road. Maybe, maybe not. And so when you get those fundamentals down and you can control the sound of that on beats 1, 2, 3, and 4, very simple, very straightforward, you're in a much better position to be able to control the more elaborate stuff down the road. So I know this particular content is not the sexy stuff of rhythm. It's not the hip, cool stuff. It's the foundation upon which the hip, cool stuff will happen, even though some people can get to the hip, cool stuff very quickly because they're naturally wired for it. Just like some people are natural dancers. They feel very comfortable in their body to express dance through their body, whereas we all know people who, you know, if they weren't walking straight, they'd be tripping over their own feet. They're just not they're not wired for it. Could they be? I don't know. It's hard to say. So there we have it, video 1 of this mini-series on rhythm, and specifically getting rhythm to become a feel, not a mechanical pattern that you're memorizing. I want you to be able to produce your own strumming solution. There's no right or wrong strumming solution right now, just to come up with something based on your own creativity and your own understanding of our little musical structure with its measures and its beats. Now, if that was all sort of making sense for you and you're feeling like you'd like to go a bit deeper with this, then I would invite you to check out my guitar do-it-yourself DIY strumming course, which you can find a link to in the notes below. Have a read through it and see what it's all about, but we do a really, really deep dive into this whole process. I'm just skimming the surface here. And if you feel that's something you want to get access to, then go ahead and check that out. Of course, in the meantime, if you're new to the channel here, welcome. And don't forget to push that subscribe button, push the notification button, like, love, share, move it around, do all that good stuff that we do in the world of interwebs. And hope to see you on the second video in the series. Until then, Steve Dempster, Guitar Evolutions. Learn strong.